people in central Ohio are.
Well, I think whenever we're talking about assets of the state of Ohio, and we are looking at leveraging those assets, we need to be wise about how we manage our money. And as a member of the Transportation Subcommittee of Finance, it's my job as a member of that committee to make sure that we're making judicious use of the dollars that we have available. So before we start saying to the taxpayers of the state that it makes sense to leverage an asset where we're going to have to pay interest over the long period, we should first look at the dollars that we have available. This is sound fiscal policy. And so I think for all the members of the legislature and the Democratic caucus, we want to make sure that we are making wise decisions with the dollars we already have available before we're making decisions that, quite frankly, the citizens don't want us to be making, which is borrowing against our future when dollars are already available. So I think for the entirety of the state, this is important.
I'd like to respond from someone who represents the Northern Party. I think John is absolutely correct. And when you're taking a look at all of Ohioans, you have to have a balanced approach, not a hostile takeover and pitting one part of Ohio against the other. Why don't you use smart, fiscal, responsible policies? You know, he has $140 million sitting there in the pot. He has to take care of that first. And for all of Ohio, I think this is not a clever way to solve the problem that really is not a problem. So he needs to listen to all Ohioans, and I think all Ohioans would agree with the northern part of Ohio and the representatives who represent them.
Can I just clarify, when you are talking, you're all talking about the political slush fund idea. So what you're saying is the money from this would go to targeted areas where he wants to fix a particular road that's been on their mind and make them think good things.
Well, absolutely. ODOT has been saying the sky is falling for months, right? And in fact, we think that some of this fiscal crisis is of ODOT's own doing to create a political crisis in the process to then come out and say, look, we're solving this political crisis and this transportation problem. Well, you actually created the problem in the first place. So to some extent, again, back to the question for the woman in the back of the room, transportation is a system. Logistics is a big industry for Ohio. And so you can't talk about just roads. You have to talk about the entire transportation system. And certainly the businesses that Representative Ramos talked about with respect to the Chevy Cruise, without the ability to have a fully functioning transportation system in Ohio, our economy won't grow. And so we can't just look at the Turnpike and exclusion. It needs to be looked at as part of the overall system. And so, again, we think that ultimately this is more about politics than sound fiscal and transportation policy. Again, we invite the governor to sit down with the members of our caucus to have a full conversation on what makes the most fiscal sense and what makes the best sense with respect to that logistics system here in Ohio. Unfortunately, he has not done that to this point.
Could the governor argue, though, that he did listen because all of you came out heavily against it? All the polls showed coming out against a possible lease of the Turnpike. This isn't a lease, it's still stated public. It's just selling bonds against it.
Yeah, I think arguably it's appearing more and more that the issue has been how can I generate money from this asset as opposed to what's in the best interest of the citizens of the state of Ohio. I think that's where all the members' concerns lies, is this is more about how do I get my hands on money that I can then use in other places of the state as opposed to what makes the most sense with respect to transportation and fiscal policy.
Don't kid yourself. If that company that leased the Indiana Tollway would have come up with $3.8 billion or whatever, the number wasn't obviously high enough because the money's not out there. This would have been a lease project. But no one's willing to pay that amount of money where they were willing to pay it a couple of years ago for the Indiana Tollway. So, I mean, this is about money. This is purely about money. And all we're saying is, number one, we would surely like to have been involved. And number two, I'm not real sure that, from a fiscal conservative governor, that this is fiscally responsible. I think that's what we're saying. And that's what I'm saying. And I'm wondering how fiscally responsible it is. Do the tolls, I don't know enough about finance, but do the tolls balance out? Is it enough of a balance sheet to borrow that kind of money? Is that responsible? I don't think the Ohio Turnpike has ever borrowed that kind of money before. And then another thing, talking about toll increases. The Turnpike's gonna make about $250 million, I believe, this year in profit. In January, we raised tolls. For no reason, we raised tolls in January of this year. It was unbelievable. Well, I had my own ideas as to why we raised tolls, to make them look more profitable, because they were going out to do a $3.4 million study to determine what the value of it was. And the tolls indicated it would just increase its asset value. That was my opinion as to why they did it. But obviously, there's no one out there. There's not a big enough buyer for the lease. So therefore, the lease is not a good idea. So what we're going to do is we're going to bond it to hell and get as much money out of it as we can.
Well, and just to follow up on that, during the budget process on the last transportation budget, a number of our members pointed out to Director Ray, look, aren't assets at the most depressed value that they've had in a long time because of where the economy is? Does this really make sound fiscal sense? We've always been told, sell high, buy low. Why is the state selling low? That seems like a horrible idea. And the response kept coming back, well, don't worry, we're going to demonstrate that this is an asset where we can get similar or comparable value to what Indiana got. Clearly, that is not the case here. And again, before you go plowing ahead with yet another idea, make sure that you vet it with the people who actually have the authority to spend money in the state, that being your legislative leaders.
And I just want to add, that brings us back to the why. And everything that glitters is not gold. And so we cannot say that this is gold yet because we still don't have the why answer. And I'm hoping that in the next General Assembly that folks show the same kind of care and consideration when it comes to local government funds and education and all this kind of thing. We want to take out bonds for this kind of thing and deprive the citizens, both residential citizens and business citizens in around the turnpike in this way. I hope we bring that same kind of zeal and zest when it comes to looking at what is happening to the local government fund and what is happening to education in this state. You're talking about bonds. We need to make those same kind of investment in our children and those same kind of investments in our cities and not to cut them. So we look forward to having that conversation during the budget next year.
Is this also a way of getting around the state's debt cap, the constitutional debt cap?
Sure is. Absolutely. And that's another issue. It's a great question. I have to comment. That's a great question.
Is this going to be state debt or is it going to be turnpike debt?
Very interesting question. It's going to be turnpike debt.
Do you know the answer?
I think the answer would be turnpike debt. Because they're not eliminating, it's going to be bonded against the turnpike. And the commission stays intact. As you all know, the Ohio Turnpike Commission is a quasi-governmental entity, and therefore they can incur debt. I think it is I'm guessing. I think it's turnpike debt, and I question the same thing. And I asked our policy people. I want to know. I didn't know how to do the algebra, but we have a 5% constitutional limit, right? What would be the 5%? How do we balance off the turnpike debt with the revenue stream? What would be 5%? I don't know if I would have a problem with the Ohio Turnpike Commission doing a balanced type of indebtedness, but quite honestly, I think they already have. They've shown that responsible management for decades. But we're going to try to fix something that works.